Now, what about the connection between your pocketbook and politics as we bring you the results of today's election coverage of the battle for Capitol Hill here on Bloomberg? Joining us is another special Taking Stock think tank. We have Larry Haas. He's a blogger for the Fiscal Times, also previously worked as the communications director to Vice President Al Gore. We also have Charles Ortel, managing director of Newport Value Partners, and Jane Bryant Quinn, author and personal finance columnist. Her latest book is Making the Most of Your Money Now. Jane Bryant Quinn, also a director of Bloomberg LP. Welcome to all of you. Jane Bryant Quinn, one of the things that Margaret Carlson brought up is this whole idea that if the economy starts to improve, whoever is elected today will take credit for it beginning January the 1st, 2011. And as a result, we will just kind of forget all of the anger, all of the problems that existed, because the economy will lift all boats. Is that likely to happen, do you think?
I'm not sure we're going to forget all of the anger or all of the problems, because there are a lot of angry people that are still going back to Congress and want to do a lot of things like overturn health care and, fight against the Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Board and do other things. So I think you're still going to see a lot of anger going. And I believe the economy will improve very slowly. But, and yes, the people there will get the credit. Of course, depends on how this falls out. It depends really on how well the president does in communicating what he has done for it.
Charles Ortel, this notion that after today's election, somebody has to govern, whether it be a Republican-controlled House, Democrat-controlled Senate, perhaps, and indeed President Obama in the White House. Is that a mixture, a cocktail that can actually work and produce some kinds of results?
I unfortunately do not think it is going to work, though I would love to see it work in anything other than a sausage-making approach. What we have, I think, in Washington, D.C. and around this country, and indeed in many countries, is the failure to understand that the global system changed after 1991, that no government is as powerful as it once was. No individual national government holds the destiny and can change the destiny of its citizens in the same way that it could when we were locked in a Cold War and when there were so many people who weren't in the global labor force. So I think President Obama has demonstrated in his 2 years tenure that he is not a man to compromise and cooperate with the other side. I don't see a way for him to, I don't think he has the credibility he would need to forge a compromise with the hotheads who are coming into power now from the right. I think he's going to be forced to the left. And I think we're going to be treated now to a spectacle of several weeks and months of bickering, both between Republicans and Democrats, and also of the knives coming out on the left, looking at the president saying, you got us into this mess. You're responsible. And I think you're going to see some people on the left in the Democratic Party rise up and decide to challenge the president early and often as we go into the presidential election cycle.
Larry, yes, please, Jane Bryant Quinn.
I do see this problem. I mean, I agree with Charles on the gridlock, but then you've got Senator Jim DeMint saying that what is his objective for the Senate in the next 2 years? Total gridlock. That's his objective. I mean, how do you get any compromise out of that?
Larry Haas, let me bring you in on this, because this sounds eerily familiar to what President Clinton had to experience in his own version of the midterm elections, and you've written about that recently. What can we learn from history?
Well, what we can learn from history is the fact that politics can change over a relatively brief period of time. We had the very same dynamics after 1994. Republicans took control of Congress, both chambers, for the first time in 40 years. The knives came out. Everyone was under attack. The president had to defend, literally had to defend his relevance. But over time, both sides understood that they had more to lose from continued gridlock than they had to gain. And over time, the edges were smoothed on both sides. The president very wisely moved to the center. The Republicans were painted as extremists. After they shut down the government a couple of times in the winter of 95, 96, they lost their tough edges, not all of them, but many of them. And frankly, the period between 1996 and 2000 was one of real legislative accomplishment. Welfare reform, immigration reform, a balanced budget, a whole series of things. So I don't share the view that we are inevitably headed for gridlock over the next 2 years. It is much too early to see. And we have to see, frankly, what happens in the Senate. I presume Democrats are going to retain what will be a razor-thin majority. But the Republicans now will have the House. They will be blamed if gridlock continues. And I think it is much too early to say that for the next 2 years, the political calculation will be that we have more to gain from gridlock than from accomplishment.
Jane Bryant Quinn, isn't this a vote against incumbents in power? And as Larry just described, now you're going to have new incumbents. They've got to show that they can do something better than the ones that just got unelected.
Well, you know, it depends on what they think their mandate is when they go in. And this, of course, depends on how many Tea Party candidates we get or whether the Tea Party candidates are beaten. I mean, the Tea Party people are going to want to go there and have their, if they're there, and have their own caucus and carry forward the opinions that they've been holding. And they aren't going to want to compromise. However, I do think, though, and this is something Larry alluded to, that the Republicans are not going to want the Tea Party people to take charge because they've had a lot of issues with this, and it's very risky to the Republican Party. So this is going to be a question of whether the veteran conservatives, if you will, are going to be able to manage that.
Charles Ortel, you've attended some of the recent Tea Party events in the Northeast, and what you described during the break that the media misses the point. What is the media missing when they describe what goes on at Tea Party events?
I think in the beginning, the reports of the Tea Party almost tried to turn it into a bunch of comical rubes. There was the AstroTurf comment. You're trying to say that these people are uneducated. They don't get it. They're not deep thinkers. And what I witnessed in the 3 different events that I went to, including one that I actually spoke at briefly, was far from that. I mean, these are people, I would say the average age is just guessing is probably above 50. It's couples. I saw as many women as men. I would say it's mostly a white crowd. However, I did see quite a few minorities. It was extremely well done. It was not, glitzy, but it was orderly. And what was really impressive, for example, I attended the one where a bunch of people gathered in protest at Blumenthal and Obama's visit in Stanford. And what was really interesting there, rather than having it be a scripted event where only, pro-Tea Party people were there, they would reach out across the street and try to get people who had another view to stand up and defend their other view. And it wasn't done in, you're an idiot because you're a liberal. It was, what are you really trying to achieve here? Don't you understand that this is a problem that is greater than the problem you're trying to deal with, the economic mess that we're in? So I think,
Is it about cutting the size of government? Is it about cutting taxes? Is it about cutting spending? What is it? What is the linchpin?
I think the linchpin is as simple as this. President Obama gave himself a B+ on the Oprah Winfrey Show in December of last year. I don't know what curve he's using to grade himself, but, Congresses that do not do their essential duty of putting a budget together. I mean, this Congress this year did not manage to put an actual budget document together. Who knows how much money we're really spending? We're up $1.6 trillion. There's no serious inquiry, in my view, into, what are we really getting for all this money we're spending? No one's going back and doing the kind of work that I've seen done, where you look at actual money spent, compare it to all the money we spend in this economy on consumer non-durable goods. Back in 1929, we spent a fraction of consumer durable goods on government. Now we're spending more than twice what everybody spends in this whole country on food, on clothing, on gasoline, on government. Something's out of whack.
But I mean, is that reasonable? And let me bring Jane Bryant Quinn in on this, and also Larry Haas, please jump in. I mean, is that reasonable? I mean, because if you compare now to 1929, I mean, you're talking about an era where there was no support for unemployment. There was no Social Security.
There was no Medicare.
There was no Medicare. All these things
right.
that people now, if you try to cut them back or take them away, indeed, there's been some ad campaigns suggesting that the new health care bill actually reduces Medicaid and Medicare benefits, when in fact that's not actually true.
That's not true. Actually, I would like to just say something about that, because this is one of the things that, of course, the Tea Party people are interested in, as well as other Republican conservatives, and that is to defund or get rid of the health care reform as rapidly as possible. The Congress is in a position to defund parts of this bill, because if you don't have money for organization, for setting up the subsidies for the middle-class people who will be eligible for health care, for staffing it, for providing money for the state insurance exchanges, you can wind up with a zombie bill that can't get enforced properly, that doesn't have the support, and then obviously it's going to work badly because it hasn't been done well. So that's that's something that can definitely be done as far as health care reform is concerned. However, I don't think they're going to touch the benefits in the health care reform bill for people who have it already. I mean, the Medicare, the extra payments.
For the people that already get the benefits,
yeah, for
right.
extra payments for drugs, for removing the limits on health, the lifetime limits on health care for people who have policies. So I think the people who have will still get more, but they've got the uninsured are in their eye. And then you've got it's going to come up also back in the Supreme Court. It's quite likely that the mandate could lose in the Supreme Court, which would take health care down totally, and you'd have to start again.
Larry Haas, you're listening to what Jane Bryant Quinn was describing, and also Charles Ortel. Is the reality that the public, that the electorate doesn't really understand what they get from the government, or indeed they want more but don't want to pay for it?
That's exactly right. We're suffering from a great amount of incoherence and ignorance. At the end of the day, the federal government really does a few basic big things. It provides Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, national defense, and it pays interest on the debt. Beyond that, there are thousands of very, very small programs. The idea of going back to 1929, for instance, and having a government of that size means that we're not going to be the world's leading power. We're not going to secure peace. We're not going to provide Social Security. We're not going to provide Medicare and Medicaid. And unfortunately, at the moment, people not only want those things, but they want more of them. And oh, by the way, they have no interest in paying more taxes. Now, until we, in essence, as a society, decide that we're going to grow up and come to grips with this basic mismatch between what it is we want and what it is we're willing to pay for, we are going to continue to have the kinds of soaring deficits and debt that we have seen in recent years.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm glad that you could join us. I want to thank you very much, Larry Haas, talking about, well, what we expect and how much we want to pay for it. Jane Bryant Quinn, Bloomberg director, and also the author of Personal Finance and expert, and Charles Ortel, Newport Value Partners. We're going to watch the election results.